Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu with me, Minnie Jacob. In a world where dashboards dominate and every decision demands a data point, have you lost sight of the one thing that truly moves people? A powerful idea? Today, we are diving into the tension between creativity and data and asking the uncomfortable question, what happens when we optimize ourselves out of originality? And joining me today is someone who's lived this tension from both sides of the table, the agency and the brand, and who believes that the idea isn't just part of the strategy, it is the strategy. Meet Amir Aliboy, General Manager at SRMG and ex-CMO of Tim Hortons. Welcome to the show, Amir.
Pleasure to be here, Minnie. Thank you.
Great. So let's dive right in. Now, you've spoken about the need to reclaim the power of the idea. Can you take us back to a moment in your experience where a bold, creative idea triumphed over data-driven hesitation and what made it work?
Absolutely. So I've been really fortunate in the past 22, 23 years to work on multiple brands in multiple categories: Pepsi, Emirates Airlines, Tim Hortons, so on and so forth. But the most challenging client and brand and business for me was when I was leading the regional business on P&G. So Procter & Gamble, as you know, is a very successful company with a very successful pool of brands, but most of their communication is very functional. And one of the businesses and brands that they own is Gillette. And unlike most of us from the Asian subcontinent or even in North America, where we would use a razor and shave ourselves, in Saudi, culturally speaking, when they wanted to shave, they would go to the salon, similarly to like what you see in Dubai. So the sales of Gillette razors in Saudi was going south. So they wanted to develop a campaign when they launched a new type of razor and try and connect with the Saudi audience. So typical P&G mindset was, let's be very functional and let's focus on the RTBs, or reasons to believe. And us as the agency was like, listen, clearly functionality is not working. And the culture here is so embedded and so strong that we need to really touch customers emotionally for them to consider the brand, let alone the habit. So that was a clear moment that I vividly remember when we had a very bold, insight-led idea that challenged every piece of performance data that the client typically leans on. And we pushed it through because the idea connected on a deeper human level, and it tapped into a shared emotion, sparked the imagination of the consumer, and became instantly memorable. And we still talk about it today amongst my social circles. And that's the power of insightful creativity. It bypasses logic and it lands in the heart. The
Right.
data may have not have predicted this result, but the impact was unforgettable because the audience felt something. And that's the reason I so firmly believe in the power of creativity, because ultimately you need the end user to feel something in order to drive consideration.
Right, right. So, I mean, in today's marketing landscape, how do you decide when to lean into that instinct or the creativity versus when to let data lead? Or, like, is there any kind of a framework or a mental model that you use to decide when to do what?
So for me, it depends on the type of work and what the objective is. So if we're delivering a tactical campaign, say a short-term promo or a limited time offer, then data can lead the way. But when you're investing in brand building work, that's where instinct and creativity are critical. And that said, Minnie, in today's marketing landscape, it's so competitive, right? Post-COVID, inflation kicked in, loyalties evaporated, and all these homegrown brands and value brands came into the picture. So the once known giants across multiple categories, be it FMCG, F&B, started to struggle and continue to struggle because value has kicked in. And if we're just going to talk about value and get into a price war, then no one's going to really win. I think that's why it's so important to utilize data in terms of more strategic initiatives and strategic decisions like pricing architecture, menu architecture. But when it comes to how to communicate and how to connect, then that's when instinct and creativity and human touch makes a massive difference, because ultimately we're trying to touch a person's heart, we're trying to touch a person's soul, and that's what's going to be remembered.
Exactly. I totally agree with you that human touch and that way of reaching out heart to heart is, I think, the most important thing, right?
Absolutely.
Great. So, do you think that this over reliance on data has made marketers a little, or rather, more risk averse? And like, how do you encourage your team to embrace the creative risk while staying accountable to performance metrics?
100%. I think data overuse has made marketers more cautious and also short sighted. And to be honest, I know it's a catch 22 because we're living in an age where CFOs are continuously questioning ROI. So chief marketing officers have to change their roles and change their hats. And I think that's the biggest challenge. But it doesn't have to be as such because I keep telling my team, whether it was at Tim Hortons or even today, that data needs to act as a creative reinforcer, but not as a showstopper. So if it's used well, it actually empowers more calculated risk and helps validate bold ideas, not suppress them. So the key is using data to inform, but not to limit. That's what I believe.
Right. And I think in today's, I mean, what you said about data being reinforcing than being a showstopper, I think is a very valuable insight here because today data is becoming such a big thing in the market. Like, I mean, in all industries and the reliance on data is becoming more and more. So that understanding of when to stop or where to draw that line, I think is very important, right?
Correct.
Right. So today, AI is becoming a key player in marketing, right? Along with data. And how do you think these technologies enhance or facilitate creative thinking?
So for me, I think AI has been a revelation. And I know a lot of people are a bit fearful about AI, and we keep reading about how AI is going to take over humans and, you know, eliminate jobs. But to be honest, I see AI as a powerful enabler, and it allows marketeers like myself and my team members to truly visualize concepts far more quickly than we did in the past. In the past, we
Mm.
used to present ideas as sketches or as a line, and we used to spend 3 4 days to develop a mood board. But now that prototype or that idea can come to life in a matter of minutes using AI platforms and AI tools. So I think AI is very advantageous, and it also gives us agility. It shortens the gap between idea and execution. And most importantly, it frees up more time for human creativity because that's where the real magic still happens. And I see all these tools as being very beneficial because it really allows us to bring an idea to life when you can't really conjure up the imagery and how it looks like or how it should feel like. And at the same time, it eliminates a lot of the layers that used to be and gives marketeers more time to invest in the actual implementation of that idea and that campaign. So I really believe that these tools are beneficial, and it's a question of embracing it and using it to our advantage.
But do you also feel that there should be a limit to how much you use AI? Because, like you said, that human creativity has to also be part of it, right? I mean, AI will help us with a lot of things, but there has to be. I'm just speaking from my experience of seeing youngsters use AI to the extent where they are just using it for everything. And I fear that they will just stop, these people will stop thinking for themselves. So, do you feel that there is that limit where marketers should be looking also at that human creativity and not just complete dependence on AI?
100%. And when you were saying what you were saying, I was just thinking of ChatGPT as well,
Yeah,
right? Because
exactly.
people are becoming so overly dependent on ChatGPT, and sometimes they forget to even edit when they copy and paste, and you see all these dashes and so on and so forth. So I think there's a fine line between how AI can play a role to enhance and to bring agility, but it should not overpower and overshadow the human idea or the human truth, because otherwise everything will be so generic. And I know
Right.
AI is only going to become stronger and stronger because the more you feed it and the more it learns, the better it gets. So that's what's scary. But I totally hear you. It's going to be a very interesting few years to come.
Future, yeah, indeed. Marketers today are probably being torn between being creatively expressive yet being data and now AI savvy as well. So, what is the advice you would give to young marketers who are in that situation?
So I was really lucky that in June I was able to attend the Cannes Lion Festival in France, and that's the biggest creative event for marketeers and people on the advertising side of things that happens every year. And On day one, they celebrate and award the Creative Marketer of the Year, which happened to be Apple. And the CEO of Apple was there to receive the award and to give a keynote speech. And he said something really interesting, which I think is great advice for young marketers and the fraternity at large. And he said something along the lines of human creativity has been a hallmark of Apple's work for decades. But today, our industry is at a crossroads. And we spoke about AI, right? And that's where the crossroads kind
Yeah.
of kicks in. And he went on to say that we truly believe that human touch is our superpower, and great marketing should not just make you understand something, it needs to make you feel something,
Right.
whether it's a smile, whether it's a tear, whether it's just amusement and wonder. So the new generation of marketers really need to define what creative communication is going to look like moving forward with all these interesting tools at their disposal.
Yeah.
And yes, they must embrace AI and data, like I said, but always in the service of the idea. And that should be your North Star.
Right, right. So do you have, from your experience, do you have any kind of a campaign or an initiative that exemplifies this balance? I mean, you know, uh, any time when you had to do this balance between the creativity and the data and AI. Uh,
Absolutely. So when
yeah,
I joined Tim Hortons, it was August of 2022. Saudi National Day is a big event. It happens every September, and it's a festive occasion where every brand, whether it's international or homegrown, turns green because Saudi is going through this wave of patriotism and pride.
right.
And a lot of brands roll out offers and value bundles. So obviously my CEO at the time and the operations team is like, Ahmed, we have less than a month. We need to roll out something that's very strong. Otherwise, we're just going to get caught up in the clutter. So I was doing some desktop research and looking at the category. And I noticed that people tend to combine something sweet with something bitter. So when it comes to F&B, the most likely combination, as you can imagine, becomes coffee with a donut. It's the perfect combination, right? Of something sweet and something bitter. And if you position it as a bundle, then that's true value. But I noticed that a lot of the brands were positioning these value bundles at 10, 11, 12, 13. And data was telling me that post COVID, with the rise of inflation and the rise of homegrown brands, value was becoming so integral that when we were testing pricing thresholds and price points, we realized that the likelihood for a new customer to consider an offer would be twice as high if it was less than 10 reals, so single digits. And by chance, at the same time, it was the 92nd National Day. So I'm like, why don't we test that threshold and give two things because it's the 92nd for 9 reals? And that was the first time anyone in the category went below 10. So we did 9 reals for a coffee and a donut, and the return on investment and the results were just immense because we saw an increase in visitation during the Saudi National Day weekend. We saw an increase in our average transactions that shot up versus the year before. And more importantly, the goodwill that was created resulted in higher positive brand sentiment and social media mentions jumping. So that was one example. The second example where data truly made a difference and continues to is, we've always heard this saying, Minnie, that one size fits all. But we realize when it comes to marketing, especially when it comes to personalization and specific audiences, that is not the case. So in our business, what I realized a couple of months in was that Saudi is a black coffee market. And the reason it's a black coffee market is because Dunkin' Donuts entered the kingdom 25, 30 years ago, and Dunkin' Donuts were always famous for their black coffee. The UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, which is more expat driven, expats tend to like dairy and milk. So they are more espresso driven markets. So they like espressos, cappuccinos, and lattes. Data validated the same. So I realized that if I wanted to roll out a campaign in Saudi, the product focus has to be slightly different than a campaign in the UAE or Qatar. So
Mhm.
whenever we did campaigns in Saudi, we would focus more on black coffee. Whenever we did campaigns in the UAE and other markets, we would focus more on lattes and cappuccinos. And that's where data played a balance in validating what exactly the product focus should be and what the communication should lean on. So those were two examples during my days at Tim Hortons that worked really well and struck a balance between data and communication and creativity.
Lovely. That's lovely. Now, moving to your experience, I mean, there are not many people who got experience of being both with the agency and the brand. And I think there must be a lot of learnings out of that. So, what blind spots now, with over 2 decades on the agency side, and now with a brand like Tim Hortons and all, what blind spots do you see in how agencies interpret client needs? And vice versa, of course.
Yeah, so having lived on both sides, I've really seen the tension up close. And one reoccurring blind spot from a client side, and this is something I mention all the time when I speak at panels too, clients seem to be very reluctant when it comes to sharing data with their agency partners. And when we're living in such a data driven world, where data can make the difference between 1 plus 1 and 2 plus 2, agency partners, in the absence of not having such data, how are they expected to truly be delivering business driving work and to truly be strategic partners? So I think that's a blind spot that clients don't realize, that if you want your agencies to deliver very creative work that also makes a difference to the bottom line, then you need to share data with them and you need to share insights with them. That's number one. From the agency perspective, and this is something I myself realized as well, because as an agency, we would work day and night, and clients would always put us under pressure. And we would stay up till 1 or 2 in the morning to submit these 200 slide proposals. And then the
Present.
clients would disappear for like 2 months. And then the clients would come back and say, listen, this is great. You have 48 hours to go live. And we would be like, what on earth just happened? But when I became a CMO and spent some years on the client side, I realized that on the client side, if we want to roll out a campaign flawlessly, we need to get the buy-in of so many different stakeholders and so many different functions. And agencies don't tend to realize this. So I think there's education that's required on both sides in order to create more dynamic and stronger relationships.
I totally relate to this, Amir, because my first job was with an agency. So
Okay.
do have. So now with your agency experience, do you feel that that gives you a unique lens to champion creativity within the boardroom, especially when data dominates the conversation?
Yeah, 100%. As in, given my agency background, I've truly become a storyteller. And it's story first or messaging first. And I think that's an invaluable skill when you're trying to champion creativity in a room full of spreadsheets. No disrespect to my ex colleagues and my seniors, but when you have these intense, hardcore boardroom discussions, it becomes a bit tricky to sell and to convince. But I think when you're on the agency side, it really prepares you for any given scenario, because when you're working on the client side, Minnie, it's more structured. Yeah. When you're working in the agency, as you know, I call it organized chaos. So when you're exposed to organized chaos, you're also exposed to how to tell stories, how to say what, when, how to read room dynamics. And I think that really added a lot of value when I was dealing with fellow C suites in a boardroom.
Right. Great. So one last question, Amir, going back to your CMO hat. What's one question you feel every marketer should ask themselves before launching a campaign?
So I think it's a set of mini questions, pardon the pun. And the first would be, why am I activating this campaign? What's the objective and the end goal? And does this idea tap into a human truth? Does it solve a tension point? Because everything we do today, we're investing money and we're getting questioned, right? By board members, by CFOs. So what exactly are we trying to solve or rectify or enhance or improve? So I think we first have to ask ourselves the fundamentals, right? Which is the why, the how, the what. And this will ultimately lead to an emotional transaction, because for me, when people used to ask me, what do you consider failure to be? For me, failure is if a transaction is purely financial. So if somebody walks into Tim's and buys a coffee or a donut, pays the bill and walks out, and that's all they think about, then for me, it's considered to be a failure. But if that transaction is emotionally triggered, then I feel that we're doing good work because I wasn't just selling coffee and donuts. I was selling happiness. I was selling energy. I was selling positivity. That's the way I see it. And I think having been on the agency side, I truly value and appreciate the creative aspect of things because at the end of the day, a financial driven transaction is about goods and services being exchanged. But an emotional transaction, that's something that's going to stay with you forever. And that's truly the difference in doing something for the short term or doing something for the long term good and the interest of the brand and the business.
Well, thank you so much, Amir. That's a lot of interesting points that you put across. Thank you for being on the show.
Likewise, thank you for inviting me.
Great. And to the listeners, thanks for tuning in. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from today's episode, it's this: the data can guide, but it can't ignite. The spark still comes from a bold idea, a gut instinct. If this episode makes you rethink your next campaign, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And as always, stay curious, stay bold, and keep asking the questions that don't fit neatly into a spreadsheet. Thank you very much.